Universities, the torch-wielding white nationalists coming face-to-face.
A demonstration by white nationalists at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville.
White lives matter! White lives matter! White lives matter!
All right. Today's topic will be the changing demographics of America. And welcome once again to Tough Talk, the Uncomfortable Podcast. We have, of course, Sean, Troy, and yours truly, Lester, here today. And so on this podcast, we will be discussing changing demographics and what that means for race relations, racial equality, voting rights, jobs, and overall power and control in America. We ask that you please subscribe and hit the like button below. So let's get right into the podcast. So little statistics at first, and these are statistics that come from the USA Facts, usafacts.org. That's usafacts.org. In 2021, whites made up 59.3% of the population versus 63.8% in 2010, which is about a 4% decrease. In 2021, however, Hispanics made up 18.9% of the population versus 16.4% in 2010, a 2% growth. And in 2021, blacks made up approximately 12.6% of the population versus 12.3% in 2010, which is a very small growth. 5.9% versus 4.8% in 2021 for Asians, and the other ethnic groups fall much lower on the scale. Based on our topic for discussion, changing demographics of America, what comes to your mind?
You know, this is a very complex topic. There's a lot that goes into the future of this country when it comes to demographics, right? Because, a lot of times when people think about demographics, we tend to only look at it from a racial lens, but demographics makes up more than just race. There's a lot that goes into that. And I know, when it comes to, our community, race is a lot of times top of mind, but within that, there is age, there is gender, and so those type of things, those groups are something that we also need to definitely keep in mind as demographics shift, because again, it's not just racial. It plays a role in age, education. There's a lot of things happening within a demographical shift. So from my point of view, it's not just looking at race, but trying to look at it overall and how that will impact a community in whole.
I guess the way I look at it, the changing of demographics of America, and we have different perspectives on this, which is good. I'm going to just put it out there. When I think of changing demographics of America, I think of the browning of America. And there are definitely a lot of other things to think of that you think about when you think of demographics, like Troy said, age, gender, and other things. But for the sake of time, browning of America is what I think about. And when I look at the browning of America, you can't help but to look at the mindset of the people who are in power, and what we see in America. And we're looking at, a lot of far right wing nationalist groups who have come up in the last several years. They've always been around, but their numbers have increased, and they become more vigilant in making sure that they let their voices be known, that they do not want to be replaced. And you heard the Charleston chant from the white nationalists. Jews will not replace us, and the whole replacement theory. And so when I think about what's happening now, you see the Trump era, Trumpism, and you see the rise of white nationalists across this country. When you see voting rights being taken away from a lot of people of color, there is a fear in America that America is browning, and whites are losing control, and we see a lot of backlash as a result of that, and that we can look throughout history and see that. So when I look at that particular topic, that's kind of what I think of.
I want to peel back the onion a little bit more,
Okay.
and get down to a layer below the America browning, or fear of America browning. So when groups see their numbers decreasing, we talk about the lower birth rate of Caucasians. When they see their numbers decreasing, they perceive that as a loss in economic and political power.
Yes.
So it's in that sense, it goes beyond the fear of browning or race. It's a loss in economic and political power that they fear. That perception prompts a fear response.
Yes.
Add in additional perceived fears of a threat to culture and the way of life, threat to Christianity, and so on. And you do end up with the whole "we will not be replaced" movement. All that feeds into how the two parties play off each other. Republicans have an incentive to appeal to that type of fear of changing demographics. This is why you see them on message all the time about protecting their constituents from those type of fears. You mentioned voting, and it kind of reminded me. I don't know if most folks even know what the term gerrymandering means. And so I'll first define it, and then I'll talk about how the changing demographics of the country, depending on what party is in control, leverages gerrymandering to maintain power. So let's start off with the definition. In the United States, redistricting takes place in each state about every 10 years after the census, which also happens every 10 years. Redistricting defines geographical boundaries with each district. And again, we talk about the changing of demographics. When one party controls the state's legislative bodies and the governor's office, it is in a strong political position to gerrymander district boundaries to disadvantage its political opponents. Since 2010, detailed maps and high-speed computing have facilitated gerrymandering by political parties in the redistricting process in order to gain control of state legislation and congressional representation, and potentially to maintain that control over several decades, even against the shifting political changes in the state's population. In some other cases that have the goal of diluting the minority vote, the districts are reconstructed in a way that packs minority voters into a smaller or limited number of districts. That policy mindset is laden within most of stuff that you see them on message with, even down to abortion, right?
Correct.
It's anti-CRT, it's anti-gay and lesbian, it's anti-trans. It's like this whole push for a pure white nation. And as I said before, it's jumbled into those fears of, anything else is a threat to culture, their way of life, and Christianity.
No, I totally agree. I agree with that, especially from the aspect of using culture as a major push, as a shield and a sword, because it definitely resonates with. Here's the funny thing: when you use religion, especially Christianity, a lot of times it doesn't just resonate with one racial group. It ends up becoming something that's crossed the line. So even when it comes to voting, you would see people with a skin tone or a different skin tone. That one thing that brings them all together is religious philosophy, right? So even in that situation, you can use that as almost like a lasso to rope people together. Religions definitely or this idea of culture, right? Like we're changing American culture, and this is not American, or this is anti-American, or you're not patriotic enough, or that type of language is used all the time, and there's a way of manipulating that to move people, as you said before, Lester, the ways of voting, right? To get people to vote a certain way, or to operate a certain way. Perfect example would be like Colin Kaepernick, right? Protest is something in this country that we uphold. We actually celebrate protest and resistance every 4th of July, but his protest was condemned. You see what I'm saying? It's like we have this almost like bipolar idea of our culture in many ways, right? And I guess is who controls the narrative of culture.
Right.
So, when someone protests silently, on paper, it's something that Americans would cherish and cheer for, right? But when it actually happens, and that person doesn't fit the look or even the message of what protests from the culture should look like, it becomes an issue, right? But 4th of July is something we do celebrate, and that is something that cause was born out of resistance and protest and fighting a system. Today, if you fight a system, you're bashed for it. You're looked at as wrong. So that's always that's one of the things that always gets me about our nation is this almost like bipolar attitude we have, or bipolar complex we have on this idea of what freedom looks like.
Well, America is pretty much at a crossroads. It needs to decide its identity, not only internally, but on the world stage. I mentioned earlier that Republicans have an incentive to appeal to that, the fear of changing demographics. Meanwhile, on the opposite side, Democrats have promoted a message of inclusion of all races, cultures, religions, and sexual orientation, right? At least that is what's publicized, I should say. The posturing of the two parties, the diametrically opposed parties, sets each other on a collision course of continual toxic dysfunction, which you see now permeating in local, state, and federal governments. This will lead to competing policy that either swings too far to the left or too far to the right. The middle ground becoming increasingly more difficult to reach. The leadership of both parties are a reflection of their supporters and a reflection of the divisiveness in the country right now.
It's definitely a reflection, and you see that, and you see, even today, you see a embrace pretty much of the of white nationalists in the Republican Party, and then some people can also say that even in the Democratic Party, there's a far left wing. Of course, there is, and some people call them progressives, and so there. But you see the hypocrisy here, as what you talked about, Sean, earlier, when you look at how they during the Trump administration, Antifa was constantly being vilified and brought to the forefront, and how they needed to crush Antifa, and it was a criminal organization. But yet, when white nationalists march in Charleston, or when they raid the
1/6,
right, on pretty much January the 6th. It was just a completely different story. And rather than be outraged, Republicans, rather than being outraged at the fact that these mostly white men raided the Capitol, you didn't see, you didn't see that. You actually saw, matter of fact, you even actually saw many Republicans blame Antifa, even though they were not even there. And so, that goes back to, even looking at facts the same. So you see this hypocrisy going on, sometimes on both sides, but in this particular case, we see that when you see people who, and then we looked at, we talked about the whites were almost kind of like let in. And I feel for many of the police officers, the police that were there and working for the Capitol and trying to defend the Capitol. But at the same time, many of those police officers were more willing to be, soft and let these guys in the Capitol and not use any lethal, not to use their weapons. And I'm sure that was Antifa. It was raided by a lot of black, brown people. I think you see a different situation. So you see the hypocrisy there. And so you see an overall fear, even in, January the 6th, you see an overall fear of them losing control. And so they said, we want our country back. So when you say that, you give the illusion that, yes, this is, I'm entitled, and this is my country. We're talking about whites. And I'm just being real plain today. I'm not I want to make sure that we're clear on this, that this is my country and you can't come in here and take power away from us, take resources away from us. And anytime, even through our history, where whites have seen a rise politically or otherwise from people who are black, there's always a backlash. And so what we see a backlash in now is the disenfranchisement of many people of color through changes in voting rights, legislation throughout the country, in at least over about 30 states, and to make it more difficult for people of color to vote. So this has ramifications. The Brown of America, the changing, and the intimidation that they see that they're losing control, and so that fear comes in, and the fear makes them do something that may not be to the interest of democracy in general. And there's a book out by Roland Martin, and it's called White Fear. I think it just came out. It's also on audio. Get a chance, just take a look at that. But he pretty much talks about the changing demographics of America and what that means to black people, and even what that means to America democracy in general.
The unique thing about America, right, is that we're not just we're called the United States of America, right? We're supposed to be on face value this united nation of people, all working towards a greater good, right? But the issues in America is so many. It's multifaceted. So I do think race plays a role in reactions, especially from the far right. But I also think this issue of what is considered American culture plays a major role as well, because the attack is not simply on those of color, is also on folks who live what we may say alternative lifestyles, right? Or that has been a word used, alternative lifestyles. It's a war against sexual orientation. It's this whole thing of defining American culture and what people feel is American culture. So a lot of the bills that we have seen passed, they're also banning certain books that may, and not just in schools. I'm talking about in public libraries where access should be granted to all, right? Where they're trying to ban certain books written by certain authors, or books that have certain themes, which our nation, in modern times, in modern day and age, we have never seen anything like that. So again, I think we, as the demographics change, and I know race is a huge part of it, we also got to keep in mind that we're educationally we're changing. We're changing our openness to how we see each other as Americans. There was a time not too long ago where two men or two women could not get married, even at a time underneath what would be considered a liberal or progressive or democratic president, right? A Democrat president. So a lot of those things have changed in recent years, and that has flipped a lot of tables for certain people with certain mind frames.
Yeah.
And certain ways of life, right? Like that was not something that was part of the American culture, and is now part of the American culture. So the American culture is evolving, and as it is evolving, it's creating a lot of unrest in a lot of people.
Right.
Well,
I think, I'm sorry, Sean. I think this tied to, but I still think even a lot of what you said still is tied to race. Because even when you talk about banning certain books, CRT, how that is presumed a threat to democracy, and I think a lot of that is tied into the fear that we're looking at talked about other issues, but I guess maybe I should have made it real clear at the beginning, specifically talking about the browning of America. And I know a lot comes into play with that, but when you talk about banning certain books in libraries, and that of course is to erase what history has shown us to be the truth in America and about America in general. America may be a great country, but a lot of that is to erase history, anything that seems to be quote unquote anti-white, anything that we've seen whites do in America, whether it be slavery, whether it be Jim Crow, in those sorts, whether it be lynching and those sorts of things. There's an effort to take that out so that you do paint a better picture of America in general, and America as a whole in many white people's mind America is a country that was built by whites. Now, race is not always, and I'm just being straightforward today, and I know some people probably will get angry, but these are just facts, and I think that we need to just get straight to the, just kind of cut, straight through it, and look at the reality of what this actually means to us as Black people. And yes, there's a culture. There's a culture change. You're exactly right, Troy. Especially when you come to, you mentioned gay rights and you mentioned other things as well. That definitely is true. But when you look at those things, when you're talking about, taking away and looking at CRT, which is not even taught in, elementary schools and high schools, it's taught on a college level, and then it's elective. It's an elective. So, but all of this is to make sure that we keep America looking great, looking crystal clean, and but not telling the whole truth about who we really are as a nation.
So I'm going to hit the nuclear button right now. Okay, that kind of feeds into what I call the hypocrisy of the country, right? We're taught what America means in schools, right? And then we get out into the real world after we graduate, and we learn a whole new set of lessons about what America is. Now, I'm not a United States hater. I'm not a domestic terrorist. But I'll say this, the stuff that is being taught in schools defining what the country is not what we see. Let me give you some examples. We were taught that America is a nation of immigrants, and we were taught about Ellis Island and Come On, Come All and the Statue of Liberty and what it meant for immigrants. But you turn on the TV and you see nothing but anti-immigrant sentiment.
Right. That's what I was saying about bipolar, right? Like,
right. Yep.
we're a bipolar nation.
Right. Right.
It's almost like same thing with, marriage is a union between two, and a man and a woman. As long as you follow that, you're good. You're an American. But as soon as you start doing something else, you're no longer an American. You're an abomination, as some Christians would say towards the gay and lesbian community. You're an abomination. Same thing with teaching history, teaching real history. You can teach history, but you got to teach it from our perspective. And you got to teach it so that it doesn't make us look bad.
Right. Exactly.
So it's like I said, America has an identity crisis. It's like, we want you to think it's one way and don't tell anybody it's not. Mm-hmm. Don't need that out there in the atmosphere. We have, it's a great marketing plan. It's a great marketing plan.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you want to get everybody lockstep, right, in one exact march.
Indoctrination.
Right, and you don't want anyone to fall out of that grouping, right? So yeah, and I think if we wanted to generalize this, I think many nations do that, right?
That is true.
You try to keep people lockstep. I mean, I know we just straying a little bit, but this goes back to what you're saying. When we talk about how America, the rhetoric, we want to keep this certain type of rhetoric. Like the Queen has passed in England, and I heard on the news this morning it's going to take like 30 hours for people to see the body as they stand in line, so they can stand in line up to 30 hours. And majority of those people who are paying their respects to the Queen, who passed away, have never met the Queen personally, and may have never, whatever she has done in her life may have not been personally touched by it, right? But it's the way we have been formed. It's the way those people have been formed, brought up, taught, that they are out there paying their respects, standing in line for 30 hours to see the casket of the Queen, because I don't think it's an open casket. I'm not sure. I didn't watch deeply at the news, but they're all they're standing outside for 30 hours. And it just shows, sometimes it's how we're raised, how we're brought up. And in this nation, schooling is a part of that. The way they teach us history, the way our parents teach us history. Like you say, Sean, the way media is pushing certain narratives, a lot of that plays a role into how, in the making of an American. And of course, you always have these edge cases where this idea of what the ideal American should look like is constantly being chipped away at. And when that happens, there is definitely massive pushback, and in some cases, violent pushback at that, right? So we have seen that throughout the years of America, where this ideal of what an American should look like and what America should be like, the type of issues that it has caused. And I think that's something that's a cycle that we may constantly see. That may change, and I find, that's one of the things, and we've talked about this outside of our podcast, but there's one of the things I'm still like on the fence about, like how much change really will happen. And based on some articles that I've read, when they talk about like the working population, which the working poor or the working class is high minority. When it comes to financial power, what changes could be made for that group of people? And then when you deep dive into that group of people, just because you're categorized as minority doesn't mean those minorities all agree. So there's still a split, a fracture in the power of this majority minority, as it's said in the media, right? It's still a massive fracture between those minority groups. that are all grouped in this one bubble, right? But they themselves are not connected. So I wonder, you know, as the population still grows and this minority population grows, what real power would they be able to hold? Because I don't think they can hold it together as a group when they themselves are fractured.
Well, I mean, I that is a good point. That's a good point. Just because you have a group similar along racial lines doesn't mean that they're monolithic in thinking and political and economic positions and class.
Correct.
But I would say that the last time I saw everybody from all different walks of life, colors, and economic backgrounds together on one page was 9/11. I think that when you have one party that is dead set on feeding the flames of all the divides, right? Rich, poor, black, white, this color, that color, sexual orientation. When you have a political party that is willing to do anything to stay in power, including weaponizing the differences, and I'll say it again, weaponizing all these differences and splits between Americans, no matter what the color, sexual orientation, or class, that's a problem when you have a party willing to socially engineer everyone to fight towards war. I mean, I never thought I'd see the day when a politician would openly talk about war. Like there'll be blood in the streets, or there'll be violence in the streets and all that. Like that's crazy. But they're on major media outlets being replayed over and over again.
Yes.
Even yesterday, a few of the 1-6 people that just got out of jail, they served their sentence and they just got out of jail, short sentence, mind you. They were being awarded by a politician, given an award and held as a martyr.
And they were talking about the conversation that Trump had with the Speaker of the House during that time, Paul Ryan, and after the riots were over in Charleston, I think the very next day, and you know what happened during that time, we had one person be killed by white supremacists. You saw a lot of white nationalists marching. You will not replace us. And Trump told Paul Ryan, he said, listen, he said, you don't understand, Paul. He said, these are my people. Paul called him and said, look, you need to call these people out. These are racist. They don't represent America. And Trump literally said to Paul Ryan, you don't understand, Paul, these are my people. So when you have a president that is saying these things and they're supporting these groups and giving them voice and a narrative, it's the ramifications of something like that go into when you look at election deniers now. You look at Fulton County, where you saw a lot of Republicans and definitely Trump basically saying that Fulton County, we should just throw those votes out, and these are mostly African American votes. So we see it right in our faces. Now, I don't want anybody to think that I'm anti-white. It has nothing to do with that. We're looking at reality. I want white and black people to get along in America. I want to see a better dialogue between whites and blacks, or whites and people of color, rather than the solution in whites' mind to be, well, we got to do something about this. Why can't the solution be, well, what can we do to get along with them? What can we do to to be able to live together? That's the kind of question that they should be asking.
Well, I think our nation was never built to be that, to do that, right? Because then that means you now you have one political party, Again, the people at the top are always vying for power. And the unique thing about, as you talk about Trump, right? Because he lost to Biden, right? But what people don't really think about is one of the reasons why Trump lost is because he told his people not to go out and vote. He told his people the system would be rigged. He told his people not to do the mail-in voting. A lot of people don't think about that, right? They don't think about that at all.
I personally
Like
don't
the power he had over people. And it's twofold, because we also don't think about the fracture that is the Republican Party right now. I mean, we saw what happened with Liz Cheney. Usually someone with her power, being the daughter of a former vice president, it's a shoo-in for her, but she lost, right? Because her constituency didn't like the fact that she went against Trump. But in certain states, Trump-backed candidates also lost. So it's this thing of this fracture that's happening depending on what state you're in. There's a core group of people in the Republican Party that are not Trump supporters and may have been supporters of him the first time around, but obviously the second time around they weren't supporters of him. I think Trump, and Lester, you said this, I think he said a lot of things that a lot of people were thinking. I also think people looked at him as a major hope. As we talk about the changing demographics of America, the browning of America, we also got to think about the workforce. There's a lot of things going overseas constantly. Technology is increasing. It's taking jobs. And no politician ever blames the corporations, because the corporations line their pockets. So what they do is blame people, because it's easy to blame people, then blame the people who line your pockets. So, for instance, when Trump was running, he talked a lot about, people coming across the border, taking these good jobs and getting paid this type of money. And that's not true. I mean, it's not true. What was happening to those manufacturing jobs in those communities, right? In these rural communities, these far suburban communities, their jobs were going overseas. Technology was taking their jobs. And he promised these people a lot. He promised these people a whole lot. And they thought this man was going to be their savior. So in all of that, he knew exactly what rhetoric that needed to be said. He knew exactly who to talk to, who to say it to get the votes that he needed to get. He knew exactly where to go when he went on and again, the strategy. He went to the states that Hillary Clinton didn't visit, right? He made himself the guy who was fighting for the everyday blue collar American, not the university, highly educated, drinking wine every night. No, he's talking to those folks who work hard, 12-hour shifts, 14-hour days, and trying to do everything they're trying to do to get their family a meal on the table. And that's who he appealed to.
I'm sure myself, like many other people, said, okay, this is a gimmick, right? I mean, the country can't possibly elect somebody like this guy. It was almost like the country didn't do its candidate research on this guy.
They did.
It was the blue collar workers that you just mentioned somehow figured out, wait a minute, this rich guy can actually relate to me and my plight as a blue collar worker and the struggles that I go through feeding my family. I think that rich guy who's got skyscrapers named after him can somehow relate to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know where, I'm not going to curse right now, but I don't know where that idea.
It's the rhetoric, man. It's the rhetoric. So he ran game.
Trump is notorious for being, throughout his entire life, he's shown throughout history his racist tendencies. And I think, like what Troy was saying earlier, anytime you have, you don't meet your promises, you don't fulfill your promises during the campaign, or anytime a certain group of people, specifically white people, are having a rough economic time. They're not able to pay their bills, and they're going through financially rough times. People of color are often scapegoated, and Trump is very, very smart at scapegoating other people for their own personal problems. And
his people are very smart.
Yeah, and so
his team.
Right, his team, his people, Trump. But Trump is really a master at it. And just like I mentioned earlier, I said, Trump is his ideology. These are my people. I'm going to do whatever I can because I need these votes. So these people escaping. It's happened like that throughout history. Anytime whites have been in financial peril, they've always blamed blacks and blamed other people for their current situation.
Yeah, all this talk about Christian nation and all of that, they got folks ready to blow up buildings with children in them with no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Shoot up movie theaters, shoot up whatever, shoot up schools. It's not a problem. And that's what frustrates me a lot with the talk about Trump. Listen, the hypocrisy is so deep. We're for the boys in blue, except for those Capitol Police.
I think somebody said earlier that when it meets your narrative,
right,
when it supports your narrative, all of a sudden I'm for it or against it. If all of a sudden the police happen to do something that's against what you're trying to do, all of a sudden the police are bad, and the police need to be defunded. But yet when the Democrats were saying defund the police, right, it was atrocious. The Republicans were the first ones out. How in the world you're disrespecting law enforcement, everything? All of a sudden when Mar-a-Lago gets raided by the FBI, all of a sudden the FBI
defund the FBI, right?
The FBI.
But Breonna Taylor search was all fine with folks.
Right. So there's just a lot of hypocrisy here.
That raid was all fine.
It's right in your face where you can see it. But I think blacks, Hispanic, all of us, even though we're not monolithic, we don't all think alike. We still have to be cognitive of what's going on in the whole scheme of things.
I mean, both parties, but I'm going to say the Republican Party has a vested interest in keeping people uninformed and upset and angry.
Right.
They say the Democrats have a vested interest in keeping minorities desperate and open to go with anything that they throw on the table. But
they dangled a carrot.
They dangled a carrot.
They dangled a carrot. Is what I've heard people say.
But what the Republicans are doing, setting people up to go to jail, because that's what's going. It's setting people up to get shot. Because you think the FBI saw what happened on 1/6. They got a different plan. That's all I'm gonna say.
Just tell the truth, Sean. Just tell the truth, brother. You tell the truth. We're not cutting no corners here. Like I said, once again, it's not about us hating white people. It's not about us. But I think the discussion has to be had. You can't just sit back and we just act as if this thing is just going to work itself out. We don't do anything. And even Martin Luther King said, there's no progress without struggle. You got to go through that struggle. And right now, I think we're in a time that we're going to have to struggle just to be able to elect people that we think need to be in office. In Georgia, you see right now when you have Warnock and you have this guy. I don't even want to.
Walker.
I'm mention this guy's name because Brother Walker's just so just unqualified. And it shows that regardless of who the candidate is, if he's a black guy, as long as he's speaking our language, he's an election denier. He's He's against, the things that we're against. He's for the things we're for. We're going to prop him up. And this guy is woefully unqualified for this position. Yet he's 2 percentage points up in the polls. And so even though Georgia is about 33% or so of blacks, we see that Warnock is going to have to get. He's around 85%, I think, of the black vote. If he wants to win, he's going to have to increase that Hispanic vote and the black vote up to around 94, 95%. And right now, you're looking at a month and a half away. And so, you see the struggle that's there. And so I just think that we need to be real about this. We're not anti-whites. We're anti-white. I criticize Democrats as well in some of their immigration policy, and I criticize some of their thinking. But right now, what we see violence coming specifically from the Republican Party. You can call it far right or whatever you call it. The Republican Party are voting in sync, though. As a party, you can say, well, that's the far right wing. These are far right wing people who we don't agree with. But yet these people are voting as you vote. They're voting for the same person that you're voting for. And they have, so you all have something in mind. So people say all the time, they say, look, Trump is this. I've heard people that served in his administration come to testify on Capitol Hill against him. But when you ask them, would they vote for Trump again? They said they would.
Well, yeah, because at the end of the day, again, and this is why sometimes I go a little bit above just the racial aspect of it, because at the end of the day, these folks have certain goals, right? These folks have certain things they want and they want to do, and they want certain power.
Troy, I mean, in challenge you, Troy, but it is a when you look at it, it's a racial situation when you're looking at people who are distinctly, especially when you look at whether it be Georgia, Arizona, or Michigan, when you look at a party that basically is trying to say that black votes do not count, and they're actually throwing yes, it's dealing with power, but it's also a racial situation.
Oh no, I'm not denying racial at all. I mean, here's the thing: America will always have racial issues. It's America. Like that to me is just it is what it is. Like racism is a pillar. Racism is a thread within our fabric of this country. It is. Right. I mean, that's what it is, and it will always. Truthfully, it would always be that way because our nation was built upon that. It's a part of our nation.
Right.
I think it's a thread that is weaved through our fabric, and it's hard to pull that thread out.
Right.
And once you start unraveling that, you unravel a lot of things. Right. So I think it's a thread that weaves through our nation. It's something we're gonna have to deal with a lot. I think it's one of those blocks that they play. But if you think about, like, where Herschel Walker is a perfect example.
Right.
Right. This again, he's a black man, being, put forth by the Republican Party in Georgia. They know what they have to do, though. And this is what I'm saying strategically. I'm politically, I'm an independent, right? So politically, I don't fit with neither party. So I vote based on my needs. I truly vote based on what I see fit for me and my family.
Same here.
Right. So in my local elections, which I think is the most important, I've voted Libertarian. I've voted Republican. I've voted Democrat. It's based on what they're saying, what is going on in my community. To be honest with you, I live in a community that's full of Republicans. So a lot of times I don't have an option of voting Democrat. But when I do, depending on what they're saying, depending on the record, depending on what they do, I may vote for them. I may not. Right. So it all depends on what works for me and my family. But outside of that local, state, so on and forth, they know Warnock and Ossoff won a few years back. Right. They know that. Right. They need another appeal, right? The Republicans are extremely strategic. It's not willy-nilly for them. Like, people don't realize. Like, I personally think The goal to use Trump was really to get Supreme Court justices in. That's what I feel. Because once they were able to get what they needed to get, he's gone. He didn't win again. Everybody thought he was going to win a second term. He did not win a second term, right? The people he had with him the first time around didn't walk with him the second time around because they got what they needed out of that man, right? I think the Republican Party is extremely strategic. So they got what they needed. They filled the courts with federal judges. They filled the Supreme Court with their majority. And they told the American people what they wanted to hear. We ain't gonna touch Roe. We ain't gonna do that. And then look what they did, right? So strategically, they outdo Democrats all the time because they're thinking ahead. Herschel Walker is a think ahead. We need somebody that can hopefully pull some of that black vote. We need somebody to do that, right? Warnock not just only has to look at pulling Hispanics, but he's gonna have to try his best to pull some of that white vote because in Georgia, they're still the majority. Right. So he's still going to have to do his best. Stacey Abrams, she lost by 40,000 votes, I think. Right. Or was it 40,000? She lost by
around 30,000 votes.
Yeah. So like 30,000 votes she lost to him by. You know, I mean, truly in Georgia, that's pretty awesome. You know, like you would think she would have got crushed.
But your point, when you take 40,000 people off the roll illegally,
but again, strategically, you're trying to win at the end.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So cheating, I think that's a little suspicious. I ain't gonna say they cheated, but it's a little suspicious. You know, you're Secretary of State and running for governor at the same time. I don't know,
right, exactly.
But I think a lot of times it becomes this. Again. I truly do feel, and I'm not saying race does not play a role. I think race will always play a role. It's something that will always be used. But we also have to look at the as we talked about before, this idea of culture. They're changing our culture, and race plays a role in this culture, right? But also religion plays a role in this culture. So, and that's why I was saying, when we talk about the changing demographic, we can't just look at it racially because there is also religious changes. You have the Muslims, that religious group is growing in this nation. But you also have this idea of this highly educated group, again, also racially growing in our nation. Highly educated Black women, highly educated Hispanic women, highly educated Asian individuals and women and men. You have a growing, aging white population that's happening, and I think there's some fear of a cultural shift as well. So and go ahead.
Let me add to your point, Troy. Yes, race does play a part of it, but to your point, I think it's very important to look at the nuances from a political standpoint and an economic standpoint, which I mentioned earlier. We haven't even touched on the economic standpoint. So when we talk about class, and we talk about the economics behind the changing of the demographics, in the beginning of the show, I said, when groups see their numbers decreasing, they perceive that as a loss in economic and political power, right? So you look at the population of African Americans, you look at the population of each race, right? We make up 13 to 15% of the population as African Americans. You see, from a class and economic standpoint, some Black folks switching sides. I don't understand how there could possibly be Black Republicans. I know what I'm saying is probably offensive to some folks, but I just don't understand because they will weaponize you and set you against your own people.
Yeah. I was watching a program yesterday about a man who you may know, Reverend, I think it was Lee Patterson. I don't know, he's and so he has a talk show, and he's a black Republican, a Trump lover, and called Trump a saint yesterday.
It's Jesse Lee Patterson. I always thought that man was a comedian. I know exactly what you're talking about. I always thought the man was a comedian.
Yeah, and you see, that type of thinking, and you wonder, and so the problem is that when you have people like that, Sean, that you just mentioned, that are constantly looking at the other side, black people, and making critique about how they live, what they're not doing and what they're doing. Yes, it's scapegoating, but they act as if all of this is in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And that history has nothing to do at all with the condition of black people in America today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just false. And you can't segment that history and the things that have happened to blacks, where you're talking about slavery, Jim Crow, in those times. We're only talking about 50 years or so, where even women had the right to vote. Well, we had the right to vote as black people, a little over 50, around 50 years ago, a little over 50 years ago. So, you're not talking about that long ago. So it's, what we see now in some of the crime rate, when you're looking now, you look at the household raised, children raised in single parent households. When you look at, the health of black people in this country, when you look at a lot of different dynamics, it's not in a vacuum. These things a lot of times are generational. And rather than America, I think somebody mentioned earlier, rather than us talk about solving the problems and actually solving the problems, the federal government has been collectively involved in exacerbating the problem itself. And when we look at the war on drugs during that time in the late 70s and 80s, and when you look at things like that, the addiction of a lot of our people in our communities, and how that was brought into our community, which is another subject in itself. All that stuff is, you have to take in consideration everything that has happened. Mass incarceration as a result of that. It always has to, has to be. It's not in a vacuum. You have to take in consideration history and all the other things, the components. And so, and I want to mention also, earlier Troy mentioned about, and I think we were talking about earlier, and I mentioned this at the very beginning. It's really about power. Race definitely is a component here, definitely, no question about, especially when talking about the browning of America. But overall, when you have, and Sean, you mentioned this too, when you have a group that's been in control from its inception, that has had power, from its inception, there's going to be, and when they see that they feel that they're losing that power, because a lot of times of the racial mix, and the presumption that if you have immigrants to come into this country, in Republicans' eyes, they're going to automatically vote Democrat, and that's not always the case. That's, matter of fact, that's shown not to always be the case. And so, but that idea in the mind is that because of the browning of America, that we're losing power. And anytime a person, and even though it may be wrong, you still can understand why that they're behaving that way. But it's I think a lot, like I said, it's about race, but it's also about the loss of power.
And this goes, Lester, with also the browning of America, but but educating America too, right? I think there's a reason why you never hear about poverty in white America, which is vast, actually.
It is.
Or failing schools in rural America, and even extended suburbs. These areas that were like what they call exurbs, past the suburbs. These areas that are not considered rural, but somewhere in the middle between rural and suburb. Mm-hmm. And their schools are not doing very well. You don't hear about that because one of the ideas I think, and this is a hypothesis of mine, is to keep a certain viewpoint of certain groups in our nation, right? Mm-hmm. We used to have a foreign exchange student from China that lived with us, and she said something about this idea of Asians being extremely brilliant and smart, right? She was basically speaking about where she's from. That is not the same mentality, right? Because they have a huge class structure there. She's rich. She's able to come here and get an education. But she was speaking of how, the narrative here in America has taken shape to put her in a certain light, even at school. So kids will want her to tutor them when she actually need help, right? They automatically assumed, based on this idea of her being Asian, that she knew everything. And it was just so funny, like her talking to us about that, this assumption that we make. And I think with this change also, I think that needs to, especially in certain communities, that needs to be talked about a lot. Like that needs to be bigged up, that, they're highly educated, high income Black communities and Hispanic communities and so on and so like no one talks about the rural white school that is having massive problems and is on the brink of shutdown. But you will hear about Atlanta, right? No one talks about it. You literally have to go and read an NPR article to find out what's going on in rural Georgia, right? It won't make your nightly news, because I think a narrative has to always be set in this country as well. So you always have that narrative. You're never going to hear about that. You never will. Right. Because
Troy, to your point about people monetizing falsehoods, that is so true. When you look at Alex Jones, for instance, who makes millions of dollars. It was basically an American far right and alt-right radio talk show host, who literally makes millions and millions of dollars off of lies and falsehood. He's being, sued right now in court to the victims of the Sandy Hook, by the parents of the Sandy Hook massacre shooting, and one of his employees said, I think yesterday when she was on the stand, that basically that this was true, that he was, the more lies that he told and the more falsehoods that he told, the more money and more viewers he would have. And this was kind of steam bankrolling his show. And this is kind of where we at now, where people forget about the morality, forget about ethics, forget about what's right and wrong. It's about me winning. And it's about me possibly even making money off of telling lies. And Alex Jones right now is in pretty much trouble. But somehow he probably will come out of this still making millions of dollars. But just to your point, it's now, and the Republican Party as a whole now has said, and you have people that are not far right, that are close to the middle, even more moderate Republicans who think definitely that that even though Biden did win and legitimately, they are still going to go along with the whole mindset that and the whole narrative that a lot of their constituents are saying, that he did not win just in order to be able to win an election or to get someone in office. And so this is what we see lies and falsehood, not only from a monetary standpoint, but we see people that are doing this who are trying to control and trying to maintain power. So I think we've come to this point in our program. If we want to give information and statistics today so that you are aware of what the changes mean to you and the ramifications of the browning of America. and the loss of power for those who are in control. And what we say to you out there is to continue to vote in both local and national elections to make sure that your vote is heard. Fill out the census when it comes out every 10 years so that you are counted, so that you can receive the necessary resources for your community. Continue to stay vigilant and informed about the changes around you and the efforts to disenfranchise so many Americans in this new political landscape. Until next podcast, we wish you peace and love.